Welcome, Atonement. Anyone watching, good to have you join us. You hopefully will see the words on the screen so that you can sing along with us as we worship together with Holden Evening Worship. We begin together.
Jesus Christ, you are the light of the world.
The light no darkness can overcome.
Stay with me now, for it is evening, and the day is almost over. Let your light scatter the darkness and shine within your people here. Joyous light of heavenly glory, loving glow of God's own face, you who sing creation's story, shine on every land and race. Now as evening falls around us, we shall raise our songs to you, God of daybreak, God of shadows, come and light our hearts anew. In the stars that raise the darkness, in the blazing sun of dawn, in the light of peace and wisdom, we can hear your quiet song. Love that fills the night with wonder, love that warms the weary soul, love that burns all chains asunder, set us free and make us whole. You who made the heavens splendor, every dancing star of night, make us shine with gentle justice. Let us each reflect your light. Mighty God of all creation, gentle Christ who lights our way, loving Spirit of salvation, lead us on to endless day.
May God be with you all.
And also with you.
Let us sing our thanks to God.
It is right to give God thanks and praise.
Blessed are you, Creator of the universe. From old you have led your people by night and day. May the light of your Christ make our darkness bright. For your word and your presence are the light of our pathways, and you are the light and life of all creation.
Let my prayer rise up like incense before you, the lifting up of my hands as an offering to you. Oh God, I call to you.
Oh God,
Come to me now. Oh, come to my voice when I pray. come before you, O God, as incense, and may your presence surround and fill us, so that in union with all creation, we might sing your praise and your love in our lives. Amen.
Amen. All right, so we are here in our last week of Honest Stories, and once again we have a somewhat familiar face. We have Danielle Hance, who is Nate's sister. You often may know her from singing in the band or playing her clarinet or whatever we ask you to do. I don't know, you can do many things.
Yes, a lot of things.
But the reason why we have you here today is because of what you do when you're not here and the wisdom that you bring to the table. So tell us a little bit about what you do Monday through Friday in your daily work.
Well, that's also a lot of things, but I work in mental health, and I have a degree in expressive arts therapy, which basically means I don't just talk to people. I also use the arts as a way of healing. And I also work a lot with trauma, and I think that's what we're going to talk more about tonight, because we're kind of going through some collective trauma.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really great phrase to use, as collective trauma. And when I hear trauma, my first thought is something personally happening to you that's really, really troubling, usually an event or something. And the way we were talking about it, it broadened this out a little bit more. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, so in the trauma world, there are things that are simple traumas like a car accident or a fire, something that has a really definite beginning and end. And what we're experiencing right now would be complex trauma. So it's something that doesn't have a clear beginning or end, and that can go on for a pretty long period of time. And also defining trauma, because sometimes we just think trauma is like, oh, somebody died, something life-threatening, this, that, the other thing. But really trauma is any time what's going on is threatening or exceeding your physical or psychological resources. So whenever you think, I'm going to be harmed, and you're scared, like that's when trauma is happening.
Yeah, and you also helped me to think about the fact that why people are reacting so differently right now. We're seeing such a wide variety of behaviors, and it can be really easy for us to judge how someone else is doing, better or worse or whatever, and for us to judge ourselves as well. And then you talked about the different states, right, that you can go into.
Yeah, so there's a little brain science. So your brain is pretty complex, but basically when we're in an executive or problem-solving mode, we can say, like, what can I learn from this? Like, this is a state you want to be in if you're in school or you're in a meeting. It's a great state to be in, but takes a lot of brain power to be in that state. And then underneath that is our emotional state. In that state asks, like, am I loved? That's when we start having a lot of emotions. We might lash out. We might need validation for our emotions. And then what a lot of people are in when they're going through trauma is the survival mode, or survival state. And that state is asking, like, am I safe? And just needs to be held and, like, reassured, like, okay, you're going to get through this.
Yeah. And that survival mode, that's where we do fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes, those are our three main traumatic responses.
And what would it look like right now in the landscape of COVID-19 for people who are in a fight survival mode?
Yeah, so your fight response, well, obviously trauma also usually means you're not in control. And so our fighters generally want to be in control. So, when everything's out of control, what can you control? And what have we seen? We've seen people like running to the stores to hoard toilet paper, to buy sanitizer. All our shelves have been pretty consistently empty, or they get filled and people are going back. So things like that, that's a big fight response. Or making a really exacting schedule, or saying, wow, I'm going to do all X, Y, Z, like I'm in quarantine, but I'm going to learn to play the guitar. I'm going to take up knitting. I'm going to write a novel. That would be like a fight response.
Yeah, nobody resembles that at all.
No.
No. And okay, and then there's the flight.
And the flight response wants to escape, wants to go somewhere else, which, there's not a lot of planes flying right now or travel advised. So people with a flight response might be having a little trouble. But, on social media, that's post a happy picture, post a landscape. Or those are the people who might be going for really long hikes and trying to do whatever they can to be somewhere else. Or binge watching Netflix. That's a big one right now, too.
Yeah, just trying to escape from it all. Would you say that people who are pretending nothing's wrong, is that a part of the flight?
Yeah, it's kind of like a denial, which is also like a stage of grief. But yeah,
Okay,
just pretending,
okay.
oh, it's fine. Or, if I'm binge watching Netflix, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about wherever, that's taking me. And then I don't have to think about what's happening in the here and now.
Yeah. And then we have freeze as another option.
Yeah, so the freeze responses can be a little more complicated. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Freeze, you're paralyzed, which, when we're scared, deer in headlights, that's pretty real. But those people right now are the people who maybe aren't leaving their house at all, not even to go for a walk. They're the people who you might reach out to and give them a call or send them a text and they don't respond, who have disappeared from social media because they're frozen.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if one of those in particular is resonating with you or you're seeing that in someone else. And a big realization that I had is oftentimes when you're in kind of a survival mode, you also tend to think very black and white. And I noticed that I might be tempted to judge how another person was doing this without really realizing that I have my go-to method and they have their go-to method. And so I was noticing people who were getting hyper-scheduled, hyper-controlling their lives and sort of showing that off, and other people who were responding with how much they didn't care and how much they were going to have ice cream for breakfast and because they couldn't do anything else. And it was almost like they were seeking permission to not be as in control as that other person. And it's been interesting to just watch people express their way without maybe being conscious that that is the way they're uniquely responding.
Yeah, I think we don't always even realize it. And sometimes we don't realize we're being affected. I think we talked about productivity and how often we think okay, yeah, we know there's a pandemic. We know we're in quarantine, but we think we're relatively unaffected. But then we're sleeping all the time, or we're not sleeping at all, or we're eating more, or we're just, eating ice cream when we should be eating broccoli. And, we sat in front of the computer for 8 hours and we'd usually get 18 things done and we only got 3. And that's a part of trauma too, because a lot of our resources are draining. It's just like if you had 10 apps open on your phone, your battery's going to get drained a lot faster. And when there's so much collective stress, we're all experiencing this and we're picking it up from others, right? As you're reading Facebook or scrolling through Instagram, you're getting everybody else's stress in addition to your own, and your family members or whoever you're living with. All that's going to add up and drain your batteries and make it a lot harder to do things that normally seem pretty easy.
Right. Which I wasn't really realizing. I totally recognized that within myself. How when I first realized I was going to be working from home, my first thought was, well, gosh, I can get so much done now. I can work on my story. I can do this. I can work on music. I can do this. And at some point, I realized that I had no brain power to do any of that. And the thought of even doing some of those things exhausted me. And my initial response was to feel guilty until I realized that was dumb.
Right.
That there's something going on that was a lot deeper than me being lazy or something like that. And you talked about grief, that there's a collective grief going on right now. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're actually experiencing right now is grief. And, we were talking about denial, and that's often the first stage of grief, is that we deny that there's anything happening. And then eventually, it catches up and we start mourning. But it's difficult, right? Because, some of us may end up knowing somebody who will be directly affected or who may die. But a lot of us don't yet. And so right now what we're having is a lot of ambiguous loss. So it's the things that we thought were going to happen, right? The wedding we were going to go to, for kids who are graduating, that graduation party or prom, or whoever you thought was going to come over for Easter, how you were going to celebrate, all those things that aren't going to happen or are going to look a lot different, that's all ambiguous loss, which sometimes can be more difficult than a really big physical loss.
Yeah, yeah. A sense of loss of control on so many levels, of not being able to do the things you wanted to do. And maybe not so much grief, but being at home with maybe the same people over and over and over again and not really getting a break, or being completely alone and not being able to see people, can be added layers of stress. So I was really happy to come here tonight.
Right? Because there's been a loss of freedom, right? A loss of freedom to
Yes.
travel and
Yeah.
do whatever we thought we wanted to do. Now it's like only essential travel, and we're redefining
Yeah.
what essential is and who is essential,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a change that just happened overnight, and a lot of trauma too is it's unexpected, and I think a lot of us didn't expect all these changes, and so it's going to take more time to actually process and to realize what losses are in that, because everybody's suffering some kind of loss.
Yeah, so something else you said that I thought was really helpful too, because it may be that some people who are listening are finding themselves in this, and this is starting to make sense to them. But there's also a tendency sometimes for people to want to barrel ahead and just kind of, well, suck it up and make it through. This isn't so bad. The recognition that we're all coming and experiencing something different. And you said that for some people, for example, they may have experienced something traumatic years ago. And even though that thing's not happening now, something about being isolated might be triggering something, and it's very difficult for them.
Yeah, so anybody who's experienced trauma before, like going through a collective trauma, is going to be harder because it's going to bring things up. And I think we talked about too about abuse and how a lot of abusers operate by isolating. And so just having more isolation and being more cut off from support systems for people who have gone through abuse is going to be more difficult. And then there are people, who are in homes where there is domestic violence and things like that that might be exacerbated right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're hearing about not just increases of domestic violence and domestic abuse, but you're hearing just couples are really struggling. Certain families are struggling. Being cooped up together for so much intense time is it's straining relationships.
Yeah, because we have less resources available to cope, right? Where some people might have coped, like some couples may have coped by like, hey, I'm going to go have a drink with my friends, and well, the bar is closed, or I'm going to go, take a vacation, and, when I take a vacation solo, then I feel better. Or, taking the kids to the mall, or whatever the norm thing that people did to cope, a lot of those coping mechanisms are gone. And so it's going to take us time to find out, like, what can I replace that with?
Yeah.
In the same way as if you were trying to follow a new diet,
Yeah.
which, people do really well with those. So.
Yeah. So that being sort of the reality of what we're living in, and maybe what's slowly settling like fog on us right now, how do we proceed? What are some really good things to remind ourselves about in this time?
I think it's good to just start with awareness, like any addict program talks about, the first step is acknowledging that there actually is a problem. And I think it's starting with yourself and, even just doing a body scan and noticing where you have tension, noticing where your thoughts drift to, noticing how you're posting on social media or how you're reacting, if you can identify that fight, flight, or freeze and where you fall on it and where others you're close to fall on it. That awareness then can help you change your reactions or figure out, oh, this is an area I need to cope, or this, I just need to acknowledge that I'm sad, or, for some of us, like, I still have a job, and I might have survivor's guilt because other people I know are out of work.
Yeah.
And I have to stop and say, like, okay, I know, like, I'm not I don't have a job because I'm malicious against other people who don't, but I have to acknowledge that this is a hard reality, that some people have jobs and some people don't, and everybody's experience is a little bit different.
Yeah. We talked a lot about giving yourself a break and giving other people a break. You know, trying to view this with a little bit more compassion, taking a breath and viewing yourself with compassion. And I think being honest with ourselves and also realizing that how other people are responding is not necessarily their choice.
And that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And that everything maybe is not going to be okay. You know, acknowledging just that things are going to be different. This will change us in some good ways, and it will change us in some negative ways. You know, we might recover in some ways, and we might not. And sometimes just being present in the moment of like, in this moment, I'm alive, I'm here, I'm going to acknowledge how I'm feeling, and I'm just going to breathe.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all we can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll just share that I was telling Danielle when we were talking that when I was starting to feel really anxious and stressed, feeling physical symptoms, I realized that I had forgotten to do the things that make me happy. And so I proudly told her about this list that I wrote of the things that make me feel happy, that make me feel better: exercise, singing, things like that. And she's like, And I realized, okay, I'm a doer. That's how I cope. That's one of the ways I cope. But then you reminded me and you said, you know, sometimes it's okay to just know that it's okay to just not be okay.
And that you can do all the right things, right? You could do everything on your list that makes you happy.
And still not feel okay.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. So yeah, I guess you can see where I fall in the category.
Which is also okay, right?
Which is okay.
I will extend all the empathy for how you know, respond when you're under all this collective trauma and stress.
Right. And my way is not the right way. It's not the wrong way. It's being conscious of it and wrapping it with a little bit of grace.
Right. It's one response. It's one pathway. And knowing that we all have different pathways and ways we respond, and they're not better or worse, right or wrong. They're just different because our brains work differently. We're, you know, sometimes we have to stop and appreciate our diversity. I can appreciate that you can make a long list of things that make you happy, because I don't think I've ever done that. And I can think of, well, that's a great idea, but, you know, I may not make a list, but I might think of one thing that makes me happy and do it. And, you know, we can positively influence each other in that way.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. It's not a competition. We
No.
share ideas.
Yes.
Give each other grace. That's good. Yeah, well, thank you so much. I felt like when we talked about this earlier, it was really, really helpful, and I hope this is helpful to people who are watching to just have a little awareness and a little grace in this time for yourself and others.
And to just keep breathing.
Keep breathing. All right, thank you. We'll return back to our Holden evening service. Once again, please sing along with the words that are on the side of the screen.
An angel went from God to a town called Nazareth, to a woman whose name was Mary. The angel said to her, "Rejoice, O highly favored, for God is with you. You shall bear a child, and his name shall be Jesus, the chosen one of God Most High." And Mary said, "I am the servant of my God. I live to do your will. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you. You have looked with love on your merciful God, source and ground of all goodness in life, give to your people the peace that passes all understanding and the will to live your gospel of mercy and justice through Jesus Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen. God, remember us in your love and teach us to pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread,
and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
Amen.
Let us bless our God, praise and thanks to you. May God's Creator bless us and keep us. May Christ be ever light for our lives. May the Spirit of love be our guide and path for all of our days. Amen. Hello, Atonement. I just had a couple announcements about Palm Sunday and the Palm Sunday palms, as well as Easter Sunday flowers. It feels like there's a lot of communication we're trying to get out, and yet oftentimes newsletters and letters take a few days and things change. So I'm trying to update you on the most recent information. So here's what's happening for the palms. Originally, we had the brilliant idea that we were going to lay the palm branches out on a table and you could come pick them up on a Saturday. However, in conversation, especially after the governor's shelter in place, we didn't want people getting in their cars and potentially exposing themselves to something with the palm branches. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to save those palm branches that are delivered, and when we do come back and gather, we will then give them to everybody and make that Sunday very, very jubilant and exciting. It will be Palm Sunday, Easter, and Mother's Day, and who knows what else all at once. Secondly, you may have seen, if you got your newsletter, that there's a big announcement about Easter flowers, but we had decided about the time when the newsletter was sent out that it wouldn't make sense to have Easter flowers here when no one could be here. So if you did order them, I think you may have already been contacted, and we can give the money back to you. But we're certainly not taking any more new orders. So hopefully that clears things up. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to call the office or to call me. Go in peace. Share God's peace with whoever's around you, or at least a virtual peace to all of you. Have a good night.
Amen.
Amen.